Welcome, everybody. We're going to recap chapter one very, very briefly, just for those who weren't here, and especially as a reminder as we start chapter two, that there's a tension in some of Ecclesiastes. Some of the things we read seem a little confusing, they almost seem conflicting, but we have to set aside our faith to understand this. And just temporarily, we're going to forget that we're believers and we know that there is a purpose for our righteous living and that's going to end with reunion with the Creator. We have to set all that aside and live under the sun. We have to think for just a few moments that this is all there is. This life is all there is. When it's over, it's over. And that concept of an earthly perspective is what's helpful in trying to keep straight some of the observations and the recommendations that Solomon makes in this book. So we record that from the beginning, first chapter. You know, we're all going to live different ways, but we're still going to die, and that's the end. And if you think about that perspective, a lot of his observations are going to be a little clearer and easier to understand. I want to remind you again that our translations use Hebal, which is the Jewish term, sometimes translated as vanity. Although when you think of, oh, that person's vain, you think, oh, or you have a vanity in your bathroom, it's something for focusing on yourself. And in reality, the word Hebal is going to be more like breath or smoke or a vapor, something that's not necessarily meaningless, which is another one of the common translations, but it's just very difficult to grasp. It's temporary and it's ethereal and it just goes away so quickly. That's more the term we're going to keep in mind. As we jump into chapter two, Solomon's going to continue sharing with us all the things he tried in his life to find fulfillment. He tried this, he tried that, then he's going to walk us through trying pleasure and trying achievement and trying accumulation of wealth and trying the application of wisdom. And he's going to look at all of those. And it's not going to be too different from some of the upcoming chapters. But again, for emphasis, he's going to just keep harping on the emptiness of these focuses. And it boils down to it ends in death. And no matter what you've done, that's the end. And that's, again, we set that aside. We know that's not true, but reading this in that context helps it to make it more understandable. We can't find any lasting meaning in anything found among the created. It has to be from the Creator. And any of the joys that we receive should be received, not that the thing itself gives joy, but that the gift is from God. That's the source of the joy. So, chapter two, he's going to test pleasure, wisdom, and work, all his sources of fulfillment. He's going to show us just how much he's accumulated. And this picture kind of shows that, the wealth and projects and the gardens and the bounty that he's created. He does acknowledge that, he applies wisdom, and that was certainly better than folly, because at least in this earthly experience, it was more positive than negative. But he still says it ends in death. So what's the real difference anyway, if that's all you're going to live for? And the key verse we're going to focus on is verse 224. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. So he kind of has this is that tension I'm talking about, which is, wait, are you telling us we're supposed to just focus on, self-indulgence? Is that the key? So he walks through and tells us about how he first starts with pleasure. And he figures, let me see if pursuing laughter and wine and entertainment, is that going to fulfill me? And you can see that in our world today, that so much of our undertaking, when you look at the people who make the big bucks, entertainers, sports heroes, people like that, that are, helping us forget the world and taking us away in a concert or taking us away in a movie, allowing us to laugh and, to be entertained. That's where we're putting the value in our culture. We're not paying our teachers. We're not paying our pastors. Those people, make us do things we don't like to do, focus on our lives and make us do homework. So, that's not where we put our focus. But none of those things, and he experienced a lot of that pleasure, provided lasting fulfillment. He then said, well, what about wisdom. And he said, sadly, wisdom ends in mortality. So it's certainly better to be wise than foolish. But in the end, death comes for both the wise and the foolish. And it's the mortality that really limits human wisdom. He talks about now saying, I'm going to apply myself. When we see him here in a picture as a young man just working hard, and his labor was invested, and he did so well that, he accumulated great wealth. But sadly, again, his end is death. And that wealth transfers to someone else, either to his children or to his other heirs or to someone else. And he's saying, hey, even a fool might inherit a wise person's work. One of the things we observe about Solomon is while he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, the Bible only documents a single son. And that single son was a fool. So his own observation about, hey, I worked and built this up and it's all for nothing if that was my single focus because I end up leaving it to a fool. So and it produces worry and frustration too. What you accumulate and what you build is constantly threatened. Weather threatens it, and competition threatens it, and invasion threatens it. So you're working for something that is not securing permanence. It's earthly, it's vapor. He then, in his old age, says, the best part of life was the food and the labor. If I received those as gifts from God, that enjoyment was from God's hand. I can't be satisfied just with the goods, but if I look at it as a gift from God, there I can have some joy. So we get a little bit of a break from his naysaying throughout the entire chapter by saying, there is some good in life. I mean, he literally says, I hate life in several places in this chapter. But when he says, the best part of life was at least being cared for by a loving God. So we talk about pleasure, and the question is pleasure okay? Well, hedonism says pleasure is the goal in life. That's what life is all about. That's the Epicureans, you may have heard the term. In fact, there's a magazine out there called The Epicurean that talks about, eat, drink, and be merry, and here's the best restaurants, and here's the best food, and this is, pay this much money for this steak, pay this money, and you'll be happy. And of course, we know that's not true. And then there's asceticism, which is the opposite, which says, all pleasure is to be minimized. You should be, a monk. You should deny yourself these pleasures. You should not, wear a hair shirt, be very uncomfortable. That will draw you closer to, life's highest goal. And we see monks and others that, take vows of poverty to try to distance themselves from earthly pleasures. Ecclesiastes tells us that if, as long as we recognize that the contentment doesn't come from the gifts themselves, but from God who gives them, then we can live a life that has enjoyment around life's ultimate purpose. So pleasure is good when viewed through that lens. So in summary, chapter 2, look at pleasure as a gift, but it's not going to save you. It's not going to bring you into the next, no matter how happy you are in this life, without a savior, this life ends. Wealth doesn't guarantee significance. Even the people who accumulate wealth can lose it quickly and are forgotten within a generation. Achievement doesn't overcome death. We all still die. It doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you accomplish, but we are to receive with gratitude what God graciously gives. And ultimately, again, while we've set that knowledge aside, we know that it is Christ that provides lasting life and that eternal inheritance. That's a wrap on chapter 2. May stop the share.